is this many parts and radius is this many parts. If you divide that into that, you get pi, but it's a little bit different beginning in the 6th decimal place. And as you square the circle and you work with these numbers, you're always working with whole numbers. You cannot work with decimals. Decimals, if there was ever a Satan on this earth, he brought decimals down to us. I think it was the French and Napoleon, actually, who did that. But if you maintain whole numbers in ratios, you can't go wrong because there are whole leaves. There aren't fractions of leaves. There's no such thing as a 0.9 pregnancy. You're either or you're not. Same thing with circles. A circumference is a circumference, and a radius is a radius, and the two can't be divided into each other. They're opposites to each other. Maintain this as the ratio. So ratios are everything. So you get down into this, you say, well, if a frequency was a tooth on a comb, and the interval between the notes was the space between the teeth, which is more important, the teeth on the comb or the space between the teeth, which doesn't really exist. And you got to say that they both have to be there, or you have neither. It's like two sides of a coin. So we've got the male vibration radiating going out, and we've got the female space in between them that holds it together, gives it range and definition. And these things are analogous to human life. You just think about it a little bit. They all fit. So we've got to maintain a ratio and relativity. So we can change this number to anything we want. It doesn't matter. Because as long as we maintain a ratio, 2 to 1 in this case, then no matter what that is, it's always half, and that's always twice of that. And the other notes are always the same. It's 3 to 4 and 5 to 6, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when you get into music. But the basic thing you want to understand is, like some guys used to say, well, what frequency breaks down water? And I say, well, it's not that simple. Because we don't know what he was vibrating. And that's all important because of the multiple waveforms that are created in any given vibrating thing. So we go back to this, keeping in mind the thing of relativity. So it doesn't matter what this fundamental tone is. This is your fundamental. As long as you maintain these ratios and numbers, they will always stay the same in relation to each other. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. Any questions on that? Relativity and say something about Einstein. I don't really know what happened in those days, but Einstein published his paper in 1905, I think it was. If you go back in the old literature, the old scientific literature, you'll see direct references to the theory of relativity in 1860, in the 1870s. And all that Einstein did was apparently read these old books, rewrote it into a form that was conventional for those for 1905, and then he got a lot of press. They didn't accept him anyway for 30 years. So, and I found that in my research, if you want to know what's going on, and if you really want to understand physics or music or sound or any of this stuff, you got to go prior to 1900. Somehow or for some reason, the books and the subjects that were written about since the 1900s do not contain this old stuff. You have to go back to 1895 and previous. Those guys did extraordinary work, absolutely mind-boggling research, what they did. Tyndall and Helmholtz and Keely and Tesla, that's when they did all the great work. Something happened, 1895, 1900, that gave us all this garbage that we have today. You got to go back to the basic principles, the basic science in the early days. That's why on my book table you'll find reprints of a lot of these old books. The ones I found to be valuable, I tried to reprint them to make them available so you don't have to spend years finding them like I did. And I also took some of these things I'm telling you and rewrote them into a simpler manual, and I call it Sympathetic Vibratory Physics Level 1, which are these basic principles, because there is no book that contains them that I've found in such a form that we can understand them today in today's terminology. There was another little thing. To give you a prime example, in this old literature I kept running into references to positive, positive, and negative, positive, negative, negative vibrations. And what are these people talking about? And, you know, positive vibration radiates out and a negative contracts to the center. And one day I was fiddling around with pendulums and I figured it out, and it's really simple. And you got to keep this in mind when you're reading this old literature. If we take a pendulum and it swings out, we're going to divide this thing. This side over here is positive and this side over here is negative. The principle of duality has to be preserved in everything that we do. So when it swings out this way, it's a positive stroke on the positive side. So this is a positive, positive phase. So we'll just put P here instead of writing it all out. When it starts to stroke back, this is a positive, negative phase. Coming over here, we've got a negative positive because it's on the negative side, moving outward, radiating outward. And then when it goes back in, we've got the negative, negative phase. So these old guys, not all of them did this because they varied. Some of these did it different. When they said 42,800, they were probably saying 84,400. Because to them, this pendulum swing, which we regard today as a single vibration, was two vibrations. And when you think about it, when it expands out and contracts as a vibration, expands and contracts, that's one vibration. Only it's the opposite phase of the next vibration, which is expands out and contracts this way. So it's really neat. These guys get a beautiful inherent insight into some of these things in the old days. But we've become so simplistic in our technology that, you know, we hit or miss it. We got lots of power and energy. We can put lots of energy in the system and make it do what we want. In those days, they didn't have that. They had to use art. And when you're building a musical instrument, you got to use art to get the sound out of it when you just blow it or strike it. Subtle energies in, major effects out. And you can only do that through art, which is right brain. Any questions on that one? Question over here.
The numbers on the left be reversed. Negative, negative on the bottom.
Yeah, you could do that. Sure. You could do that. I just wrote them over no particular location.
I'm not trying to be too technical here, but the one on the negative side, as it swings out, the bottom one, would that be negative, negative?
Right. Yeah.
Negative, negative. Negative, negative coming in because the negative side is contracting. It's a contractile force, the attractive force towards the center. And the negative attracts to the center. Positive goes out. So when it goes out, it's positive. When it goes out, it's positive.
Okay, I understand. All right, thanks for clarifying.
Okay. By running out of things here. Need some questions. Here's a good one. This is some work I did in 88, 87, 88, whatever. I was trying to figure out how to determine a person's keynote, and do it empirically so that we know what we're talking about. We're just not dreaming stuff up. And there's a lot in this chart. Basically, we start out here in the key of C, and going around this direction, you can see how the notes extend away from the center on this side, and then they contract back towards the beginning point again. If we assume that the Earth goes around the Sun, and we call this March 21st, at the beginning point, which is the beginning of the cycle of the Earth around the Sun, not January 1st, March 21st, goes around the Sun all the way back around back to March 20th, then we could say that any time period, if we divide, I got this divided into 14 sections instead of 12, and there's a good reason for that. In conventional music, there are